Thank you, Bruce. Well, those are the 8 companies. We have a panel on where we think voice is going. So I'm going to invite John Borthwick back up on stage with the last 3 companies that demoed, along with Nancy from GE. You've heard enough of me, so I'm going to sign off here. But 3 thank yous that didn't happen yet, which are very vitally important, are to John Borthwick himself, as well as to Matt and Peter. So thanks to you guys. And with that, it's all you.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. 2 mics. So I'm between you and drinks. We're going to do a quick panel discussion about the future of voice. I have a few questions, and then I'm going to open it up to you guys. So please, if you have questions, or think of questions now, because we've covered a lot of ground today. I mean, we've sort of gone all the way from sort of visions of continuous computing to seeing actually how that could go into market, to touching on things in healthcare, touching on things in agriculture, storytelling, customer service, and we also have our friends at GE here with us today. So let me start with, since you've met these 3 here to my left, on my far left is Nancy. So why don't, if I could ask you to introduce what you do a little bit at GE so people can understand why you're here.
Appreciate it. Yeah, I work in the global brand marketing department at GE. A lot of the work that I do focuses on what are the ways that people are communicating and learning. So what are the platforms that they're using? What are the new, the word tribes was brought up earlier. What are the ways that people are connecting with each other, and how do we leverage that from a brand perspective to show up in a really fun, human, and authentic way as a B2B brand?
Great. So, so let me start off with a sort of fairly high-level point. So last week I had a meeting, and somebody asked me in the meeting, they said, okay, if today, average American is spending about 2.5 hours of their day is non-accessible to screen time. In other words, that they are either commuting, they're working out, they're maybe in the kitchen, they're doing something where they don't have access or immediate touch to a visual screen, so that they are using voice. They're listening to podcasts as they commute, or in the kitchen, they're talking to Alexa. That 2.5 hours, this woman asked me last week, do you think that's going to expand in the next 5 years or contract? And so what do you guys think as you think about sort of, the future of voice interfaces and interfaces generally? I can see, John, you're itching.
Do you mean the usage of voice in those scenarios, or are you talking about the amount of time that people spend in those scenarios?
Answer both.
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, I think that, I don't think people's behaviors are going to change. I think that if they are going to change, it's because those behaviors will be integrated with voice, and then it could maybe change them. But I think the first step is that there are things you are doing, and you want to either A, be doing something else, or you want that to be easier, and that sort of frictionless space is where voice is becoming very popular. It's like multitasking is a big part of it. And so what you mentioned, they were all scenarios where multitasking was critical. So.
Yeah, I'd like to build on that, because that strikes me as one of the key advantages that artificial intelligence, specifically in this space, has the ability to, in examples of amplifying your productivity. Mm-hmm. So to give you that ability to say, I only have 5 minutes right now, but how could I hand off to technology that can do 4 hours of work to me? We saw that previously at X.AI, and just this massive improvement in someone's productivity when they can just delegate to an agent. And I think that that's only going to increase, right? That people aren't going to get easier commutes. They're not going to get less demanding jobs and children who don't need childcare and things like that. So you have to do more with the time that you have. And I think that's the real promise of being able to understand user intent in a very coherent and simple way, and enable true delegation to technology in a way that's something that's all about button pressing simply can't do.
And kind of piggybacking on that, what I think you're doing is really helping there to be a lot of less like nose down in the phone, right? And I think a lot of voice does that as well. I think we've reached this point sort of culturally where, we accept it, and it's normal for someone to be heads down in social scenarios in the phone, which is okay, but I think we're also hitting a point of fatigue with that. And I think that voice kind of enables you to kind of be much more aware of your surroundings on a moment-to-moment basis when you're using voice as opposed to heads down. Not that it's replacing at all. I'm not saying that. Just that I think we're going to find things that peel off that aren't, you don't have to be in there as much, and it'll probably be a little bit more, relaxing and easing.
Yeah.
I would agree with that. I think everybody's kind of taking an audit of how they spend their time now. Like, you go to your doctor and they tell you that you're getting carpal tunnel because you're texting too much, your neck's like bending over. So people are really cognizant of how they're spending their time. So I think the amount of time isn't necessarily going to change. It's how we do things, and people are smart, but they're also lazy. So if it can be more efficient to talk, I think there was a great point earlier on being able to just say something. It's easier. Duo made that point. So I think more and more, the more we drive the behaviors now and start to incubate them, the further in the future that this is going to feel natural, whether it's in your home, whether it's taking documentation at work, et cetera.
Yeah, the thing I'd add there is, I don't know if I heard the phrase today or not, but eyes-free and situational awareness is something we found our users really highly value. If you go back to the scenario of the veterinarians walking around the dairy, those 1,500-pound animals don't care about the other 1,500-pound animals, nor if there's a veterinarian between them. So there's actually a safety benefit that we actually evolved to. That wasn't our first thing, but it was exactly what you said. It's the convenience factor linked to the hands-free and situational awareness. So to net it out, we can make more time for those users.
Yeah, so it's interesting as you go back to the sort of the discussion I had earlier with Chris Messina, is that he was talking a lot about contextual data, but the situational awareness, as you call it, is sort of about contextual data, and very much in the enterprise, I can see that as being important. I also think that on the John Dunn side, the delegation point, sort of harks back to the early days of like bots, and we used to call them user agents, right? The early days where sort of, we thought these things would be working for you. And, all too often we've been working for them. But I think that now we're starting to see ways to sort of have technology we can delegate to, which is intriguing. So if you go, so think 5 years, 10 years out, how do voice interfaces and how does voice as part of a sort of overall computing experience, this continuous computing experience we talked about earlier. So you're going to have sort of, probably some kind of embedded technology that will give you sort of either through contact lenses or through some embedded version of your glasses will give you sort of a view, whether you're in the field or whether you want to participate in storytelling or customer service or. So push all the, further out. How do you think, how are you thinking about sort of voice as a piece of that?
So right now, the devices are there. Yeah. They're physical devices. You're buying a speaker. You're using your phone. They're things that you're speaking to and responding to. Those will disappear in terms of voice, at least. And that's, you won't have to talk at the thing. You can just speak in the air. The microphones will be there. And I think that's going to change things a little bit. I don't know exactly how. I think it's going to be fascinating. But I picture this world where from the moment you wake up, go to work, do your daily things, you come back, you go to bed. From that whole moment, there's a microphone waiting and listening. That may sound very scary as well to people, and I think there's some things to consider with that. But that's what I think that's going to be. It might even happen faster than 5 years, to be honest. But
Yeah.
We think a lot about how machines and technologies can free people to do greater things. So looking at the App Store, say, 2009, the things that really stuck and grew were utilities and social apps. I actually don't see that changing with voice so much. It's just the interface and that habit that's going to build. So I think more and more, we were told we were supposed to clap in the 80s to turn our lights on. Now we're saying talk to your lights. I think more and more connected home is going to be a thing. It's why Alexa doubled down on that environment. I think that's going to actually lead itself more to a B2B environment to enable working better, because that's where you're going to hit scale. So I think there's going to be a lot of applications for the workforce in 5 years.
I think that touching on John's point about, it made me think of ubiquitous intelligence. You look at the behavior of children, and so a few years ago, children started to swipe televisions. They don't have touch controls. Now children shout at speakers that may or may not be smart. And so when they go to work, they're expecting to be able to access any piece of information, and maybe not even just information that's on Google, but maybe something that's really quite contextual. So what is that painting all about? Is a question that you should be able to ask in a museum like this. and that people will take that expectation to so many different contexts and expect that there's this true intelligence with a contextual understanding and possibly the ability to even accomplish meaningful background tasks. Like, actually, I want a poster of that painting I'm looking at right now. Buy it for me, send it to my home. You have my voice. You know that precisely who I am, where I want that sent, and that complete painless handoff that presumes so much enabling technology is still not quite where we're at with most app-like interfaces via voice.
So in the food sector, we got a pretty fascinating glimpse of our future with the, in my opinion, the Whole Foods thing just a few weeks ago with Amazon. Because if you link that together with, say, the Amazon Wand, which is $20 but was on discount that day for free, all of a sudden there's a fascinating front end of the consumer channel where every consumer here can ask, how's my food grown, and tell me more about it. We see ourselves, we could be the other end of that spectrum, and you could talk to the farmer that grew your food. And so we'll have to deal with a lot of privacy things, but we think those things can be worked out, and proper things with anonymization. The basic point is there's a level of connection end-to-end between the end consumers for all the food and the industry, and that dialogue has been broken for some time. In my opinion, it's not as bad as politics, but we've talked past each other from an agriculture and a food standpoint. And I think there's a fascinating dialogue that voice enables, two-way dialogue that's in our future.
Interesting.
Something I find interesting, discussing sort of work, which I think you're solving a really interesting problem, and it works well because the people are in isolation as it occurs. Because I think that there has been voice in the workplace for quite a while. There are enterprise solutions and telephone options. Nuance has been around for a very long time, but that hasn't come out into the open air office yet, which is the difference. And that's what's happened, I think, over the past couple of years, is that the always on speaker has entered the consumer field. Definitely not enterprise or B2B yet. And that shift, when that gets there, it's going to be interesting. I mean, it's definitely going to be dependent on vocal print, vocal ID, a lot more security, right? And again, that's why I feel like you're in a really good situation. You're exploring a field in the workplace that doesn't have some of the same concerns as an office, right? But there will be. Imagine that if I could just access your calendar by speaking out, that's kind of problematic, right? But Google, for example, is learning to differentiate voices and make that a part of their software. Amazon's doing the same.
Those voice points, Jim also.
Yeah, but that'll need to come along quite a bit first, so before that really integrates, and that'll be interesting, I think, when that happens.
So, questions? There's one in the back. I can see that. Can you scream?
Sure. So this might be part of just a New York background, but I see a lot of need for, you can speak quickly to a voice device and you're getting better at recognizing it, but I don't see any that have let you configure, like, just give me a brief reply or don't tell me the weather in your city today, blah, 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 blah. I mean, do you see talking with the companies, or even if this is an actual need to customize the response and the context for that?
Yeah, definitely. What you're talking about is, I believe, a design issue, right? With these services, Alexa, Google Assistant, the developers are the ones that have control over the experiences that you're discussing, unless it is custom made, by the company that is offering the service. So these third-party developers, people like me who develop skills, this is the forefront, and I have 4 years of experience with voice user interface and voice user experience design, and I feel like we're at the forefront. But there are not a lot of people that knowledge is still being shared, and so kind of what you're describing is what I would call a negative voice user experience, where you aren't able to just access exactly what you want when you want it, and a good voice experience would be able to give that to you, and so it's just a matter of design, and it will be there though. It's just not quite there yet in all skills.
And this is frankly a new profession. And so voice interaction design, if you look to the literature, has existed for a while, but it's only been within the past couple of years that you've actually been able to meet actual dialogue designers, artificial intelligence interaction designers. That was a role at X.AI, and where they had to, there was at least one person who had to design the voice of an intelligent agent and understand what it means to be task-oriented and try to accomplish something. So this is really important for productivity software, for things that are trying to accomplish a task, whether it's for you in the office or at home. But it's this huge opportunity for all sorts of other class of applications to perform the task of design and to really work with user intent to detect potentially, oh, Alex sounds like he's really busy this morning. I'm just going to get to the point, tell him the traffic, and get out of his hair, versus being a little bit more static and less designed.
Jeff.
Jeff, you guys win the cool demo Olympics.
Thank you.
Very, very good stuff. My name is Jeff Jarvis, and I inadvertently, some years ago, started something called Dell Hell, because I had phone mail hell with Dell agents. So I'm fantasizing about you having the C to B agent. The company's going to want a B to C agent, right? And will the two agents negotiate themselves and come up with solutions?
Right, that's actually precisely where we started, right? And so we started with fighting fire with fire. So the first application we built was a single Python script that was able to call the Postal Service, talk to their bot, and order stamps. And so the good news is bot on bot is some of the technically easiest things that you can do because bots speak very clearly, their logic is very deterministic, and so we're able to conquer those problems very simply. And really that's kind of our inspiring motivation is that you as a busy person should have more technology on your side because people have been forcing you down these sort of painful user experiences like those IVRs that are not advanced in their language understanding, that are actually requiring you to walk a tree, that don't have any user experience around trying to figure out what is your intent and how can I help you solve that. Those experiences lag so much, and so there's this huge ability to flip that question on its head and take you as the boss and figure out how to work with them. But once you do that, then you're able to negotiate bot on bot. I think that there's a lot of people already building for enterprises, and I think that what you find is that if you build a good enough consumer product, you're actually able to negotiate. Facebook actually just released last week some research on their ability to develop intelligent agents that were able to negotiate a particular matter completely autonomously. I think that that's what we're going to see across the industry. So when you have an intelligent agent that schedules your meetings, that recruits your employees, that orders your food, all of these agents can interact and develop protocols using the most ubiquitous protocol we have implemented right now, which is natural language.
So you're saying humans and emotion are what mess up customer service?
I'm saying failing to consider humans and emotion. That we as humans have feelings.
One question here, Chris, and then Dennis in the back.
So I guess my question is about costs. One of the interesting things about a denial of service tag on all the flower forests in New York is that they're not really set up to scale, right? So if I'm able to basically ask for 1,000 phone calls to go out at once to whatever I want, you are giving me, as a consumer, a huge amount of power. Now, especially in the world of VoIP, where a phone call is free as opposed to how it used to cost money and SMSs cost money, how do you actually balance the power that you're delivering to a user that may have a very facile understanding of how the system works? In other words, call everything, and then everyone's calling everything, and now you sort of completely imbalance the whole ecosystem.
Well, so there's some great news there, though, right? Because if you're expressing some intent and you're saying that there's so many users doing this, that there's actually a lot of people with the same intent that we maybe have the ability to solve the problem a different way. Like let's.
My follow-up question is how do you deal with Amazon sort of getting into the customer service space and offering that as a service to the people who are selling things through Amazon's marketplace?
So I'm not sure I would really be super concerned about Amazon. So there are a couple of people who are very interested in how can we get humans to talk to humans, consumer to business. This is Yelp's bread and butter, and Apple's trying to do some things there. But in terms of actually really starting with an artificial intelligence mediated interaction, I don't see people starting here. This is a sort of white space where I think people just haven't noticed that this is a problem. It's a sort of somewhat contrarian perspective that allows you to see that actually I really shouldn't ever have to call my laundromat. Like that they should just my AI should know that it needs to make a phone call, tell them I have dirty laundry, come pick it up, and then someone just shows up at my door, which is how my laundry gets done today. You didn't notice it was a problem until you realized that it was possible to just have it completely come off your plate.
Dennis in the back.
I have a daughter. She's 13 months old. She's got 4 words, and the 4th one was
Yeah.
I'm embarrassed of that, and I'm also fascinated by it, and I love, there's a diverse group of people here. What does a bot for kids look like? What does it do? And what are there supposed to be bots for kids?
That's a very, very good question. First thing, I've heard that exact thing from many people in meetings. That's very common. Yeah. Oh, no. This is yeah. The kids today, it's just natural. The problem is COPA. It's legal to record a child's voice and have it sent to the cloud. So there are what's that? Without parental supervision, right? And so there are strict scenarios, and there are restrictions put on content that goes out to these platforms, right? You cannot, at this stage, just make something for kids. There's been a lot of issues with this in the past. We've seen it happen with Talking Barbie. There's another Mattel, Aristotle, I think, that came out. There are a lot of problems to solve, and there's a lot of legislation to figure out and regulation to be done. So I don't see it happening very fast. Now, parental mediated experiences, I think, are huge. We always are getting, and you have to be 18 to sign up for an AirPlay account. We make it that way on purpose, because if someone too young is experiencing a story, no matter how good it is, there should be some parental supervision because of the recording, right?
But if somebody, if as a parent, if I want to encourage my child to have a storytelling experience with AirPlay, that's possible, right?
Yes, definitely. But the idea is that you would have control over that, and I mean in other media it's very much that way. It's the same, right? And I think that what we're going to see happen is we're going to see a lot more regulation. We're going to see a lot more opportunities, and I think again it's the voice differentiation aspect that will make this a lot easier.
Yeah, I mean, I want to hear from the other panelists. Yeah. I think that you gave the right answer, but it's the reality is this device is hot in the kitchen.
Okay.
It's on all time, and parent may leave the kitchen, and child will be left there, and will know the trigger word, which is what Dennis is saying, because the next word that they can learn is maybe buy, or or order that again, because they may have heard that in family.
Yeah,
Nancy.
I think we actually had a really interesting discussion with James Cooper, who works at BetaWorks, around this. And it's like, what are we teaching our kids? Are we teaching them to be polite to Alexa? One of our coworkers at GE, tells her kids to say please to Alexa. So are we developing the right guardrails to do that for voice is interesting. For GE, we think a lot about what's our tone. We're always fun. We're always nerdy. We developed a kit last year called Labracadabra that had a voice application where you could work in the kitchen and do science experiments at home, parentally supervised with your kids. So we constantly think about what's the interaction that we're teaching as a brand. And I think more people have to think about what they're putting out into the world, especially for kids.
I mean, you think about TV too. Certain things came along like parental lock, right? But at the same time, a TV. I remember HBO when I was young was the thing, the way how you could get racy content, right? It's going to reinvent the same scenarios and problems, and figuring that out. But for today, but I will say that as a device, you're saying that sits in the kitchen, sits in the living room. It's very popular with families. Families like to do this together. The thing that shocked me is we originally started creating AirPlay as somewhat of a solitary experience because it started on the mobile. Eventually, we were getting all these reviews that were saying, we love doing this together. My daughter and I love playing this. And we were like, wait a minute, this is becoming somewhat social. And I think that's going to be a very interesting future field of what does it mean when these interactive audio experiences, or just interacting with these devices, period, is socialized because it can hear and understand there are 3 people here in this room. So yeah, I think we're still at the very beginning of all this, right?
Yeah, and you could have customized storytelling for different voices, and so.
This could be very interesting.
Other questions? Yes, Lily.
So I was really inspired by Ag Voice, really because of the kind of clarity of the scenario. So I just, maybe for all of you, a question. With a lot of the voice scenarios, do you see people combining this with drones or vision intelligence, or do
Interesting, really good question. One of the things you might not realize, we all have this iconic view, at least in the US, of this yeoman farmer. It's one person and a pitchfork and a cow. And the reality is this is like a team sport bigger than the military. There's basically an army of experts that support the farmers, the ranchers, and the growers. So your question's a really good one. There's all kinds of sensors coming to drones. The fun factoid I have to get in, we've had self-driving tractors for 10 years before Tesla was around. So there's lots of technology in the industry, but their highest value, to cut back to your insight, is when that data is shared and it's collaborative. So we think our highest value is to share quickly and share often among those different pieces, a piece of the Internet of Things or the Internet of Food, if you will, because voice itself is a piece, but it's best in a complementary role. Just like I see like Amazon doing a great job taking it and coupling it with commerce.
I think the example of farming is an excellent example of where you see incredible productivity gains. Like as you look at the historical data from the amount of output from an individual human being, the ability for us to have these technology-enabled like coordinators of massive scale tech, these orchestrators, right? They're capable of using things that are smart and highly scalable to be able to produce so much more. I think that's a very exciting prospect for those of us looking to do things which supplement the productivity of human beings that work with their intelligence and just blow it up to a scale that was unimaginable to a previous generation.
So does anybody have any other questions quickly, because we're out of time? Dennis, again, quickly.
So, like, how do we get out of this world where you ask Siri one thing, Alexa the next thing, and Google the third thing, to like one bot that rules them all? Like, Google's gonna be good at some things, maybe Apple's in the car because that's what we've got, and you know, like, how is that all gonna happen? Is it gonna be one bot to rule them all? Is it gonna be like using a web browser? We can just do whatever you want.
I think that's where you're getting at. You know, there's an operating system and it's voice, but let me just go with that analogy at least. And then there's Internet Explorer, right? Well, first there was Netscape, right? And then there's Internet Explorer, and Google came along, and Firefox, right? And you invoke that by opening that browser, and you have one that's a default. I have a feeling that in the future, it'll be that way. You decide which is the default, but you can always switch between them. You know. Oh, that would be, you know, that's an interesting, because you could just, because it's easier than opening this browser or that browser. You're saying, oh, I want to talk to Alexa now, I want to talk to Google. I think they'll probably meet together. You know, I think they can integrate.
I think it's commonly held among people who build intelligent agents that our intelligent agents will coordinate the exact same way we as human beings do. There's not one person at your company, but rather there are many, and that depending on what you're trying to communicate, you might address a different one, and that they themselves are capable of coordination, carrying your intent and executing it on a larger scale, coordinating through that mechanism of conversation. That if we can go back to natural language, then we can have Apple talk to Google, even if Apple and Google say that they don't want to. We have the ability of using conversation to bridge a gap. There's nothing they can do to stop us.
I think a lot about when I'm on the subway, I think a lot about Ray Bradbury and the Shell example, and thinking about people with earphones, now with earpods even less. I think, you know, with hair I can cover up the fact that there's something else listening to what's happening around me. So I think, you know, if we look really far into the future, maybe there's, just like we're absorbing information in our brains, maybe we're absorbing information, something really tiny in our ear, and people don't know that that's happening around us. Yes, there's a lot of law around that, but maybe as we're absorbing those things, they get fed to the Googles, the Amazons, and all of these things talk in another layer around us. So that's scary. But.
So with that's all. Thank you, Nancy. I'm going to close with that and let you all go to drinks, and hope you can connect with the companies. Thanks for coming today. Thanks to the teams putting it together. Thank you.